Hey, what is up guys, TheKnowee here, and today I'm going to be continuing my Unity tutorial for beginners. This is episode number 2, and in this episode I'm going to be jumping into the coding aspect of making your little pill guy here move from point A to point B all the way over here. So, how the heck are we supposed to do that? Well, we need to add one more component to our little pill here. So let's move him up a little bit and let's add a component, and it is called rigid body. And what is a rigid body? Basically what a rigid body is it adds physics to our little dude, right? So now if I press play with a rigid body on our guy, he will fall and touch our wonderful little block that we have placed in our scene. So that's pretty cool. But now we actually have to start coding him. So what I want you guys to do is in your assets folder here, we're going to right click, we're going to create a folder, and we're going to name it scripts. And this new folder that I have just created, we're going to create a C# script, and we're going to name it layer. Alrighty, so now what we're going to do before we really start jumping into the coding aspect of this is we're going to apply this to our capsule. So let's add player. So you guys can either come over here to the very right side and click add component, or you can drag your player onto the capsule itself, because this is your player, or you can drag it up here just like anything else. But I just went ahead and I added component over here and added the player script. Once you guys have placed your player script, let's go ahead and open it up, and welcome to Visual Studio 2019. So we're gonna wait for this to load, loading all of my stuffs from before. Boom! Welcome to Visual Studios. Now, don't be afraid. This is Visual Studios. It's not going to hurt you. Promise. Now, before we get into all the crazy things that you can do with coding, first things first, I want to explain all of these things that are currently on screen so that you're not freaking out. So, first things first, what is a start method? Well, a start method is whatever happens in a game when you press the wonderful play button. So when you press this button right up here, the start method is called. What do you want the game to do when start is called? It's only called that one point in time. So if you want something to like get something else, like you want to get a component, or you want to be able to tell your capsule to do one specific thing at the very beginning, that is what your start method is for. Okay? Your update method, oh my goodness, that line was terrible. Your update method updates every frame, and that's what this little thing is saying right here. It updates once per frame. Well, what is a frame? It's basically just how fast your computer runs, and it'll change depending on your computer. But necessarily, your update is going to be called once per frame. Now, what is this green thing? Does it apply to your code? No. And that's the awesome thing about the double slash marks in the very beginning here. This basically says this is not part of the actual code. This is just a note so that you can clarify something. So let's say you're working with someone else and you're coding a super huge project. Well, you can say, hey, this is what this specific piece of code does, and then continue on from there. So now that you know what your start and update methods do, let's continue on to actually getting into coding. Now, we want our little capsule man to jump, right? We want to be able to say, hey, when we start the game, I want to be able to press the space bar and him do something. So right now, if I press space bar, nothing happens, right? So I want him to do something. Well, there's only going to be one way to do that, and that's to access the rigid body. Well, now you may be asking, well, how the heck do I access the rigid body from the script? Well, let's get into writing your very first line of code ever. So let's hop back over here into Visual Studios. Now, where would we call this method? Well, we would call it an update, because we don't want him just to jump once. We want him to jump every single time we press spacebar, right? So now I'm going to introduce you to what is called an if statement. So I'm going to write this down for you guys. So what is an if statement? An if statement basically says, hey, if you have something, then do something. So let me give you guys an example real quick. So in our update, if I say if, and then let's say hungry, right? If we're hungry, what do we want to do? Well, we're going to eat. right? So this is just like a real world example. Obviously you can change it, like let's say you're thirsty, right? If thirsty, then drink, right? Or if you're tired, sleep, or you know what I mean, guys. So that's what an if statement is. If something, do something. Now if you guys noticed, so let's go back. So like if sleepy, right? It's yelling at me. Well, why is it yelling at me? Well, it doesn't exist. Sleepy as a variable, basically anything that is put inside this if statement here is a variable. But it doesn't exist. This does not exist. We have nothing that says what sleepy is, right? Or if you're hungry, or if you're thirsty, right? So how would we say that sleepy is existing in this context? Well, we'd have to define it as a variable, right? So let's quickly go over how to define something as a variable. Well, there's multiple ways to do that, and we would do that up here right above your start method. So every time you're going to be declaring a variable, you're going to be declaring it up above your start methods, because it is not going to be a method. It is not in start as a method. It's not in this if statement as a method. It's not in update as a method. It exists above it right here. Okay? So now you saw how I added this line. If you guys want to add a line, you press enter, and it'll add a line for you guys to start typing. Now there's multiple ways to define a variable. There's a ton of them, but we're only going to go over a few in this video. Alright, the first one we're going to be going over is honestly the simplest one, is a bool. What is a bool? A bool is simply just stating if something is true or false. Alright, so let's say we're going to define a bool, right, and we're going to name it sleepy. Now all of a sudden, sleepy's happy. In our if statement, sleepy is happy because it exists. You have defined it as a variable. Now it is setting as true or false, right? So now we actually have something that says, hey, there is a thing called sleepy. Well, is it true? Is it false? And any if statement will automatically say that it's going to be initiated as true, right? So you are sleepy. Well, if you're sleepy, what are you going to do? Well, I'm going to sleep, right? Or if you're tired, or whatever the heck you want to name your variable as. So simply all a bool is a true or false statement, right? So a boolean or a bool is setting something is true or false, right? But we're not going to be, obviously, we're trying to make our character jump. We're not defining him as sleepy. Obviously, we're not making a game where you're dependent on sleep. So let's actually make our line of code. So go ahead and type this down with me. So we're going to type if. Now, how do we get a key? Well, there's multiple ways to get a key. And the first one is input. So input. What is input? Basically, input is saying, all right, what am I inputting into the system? So what key am I pressing? And if I press period, all of these wonderful little things pop up. Acceleration event count. And basically what that is, here, let me go back to you. So I'm going to circle it. Then go back. So press period again. And see how all of this stuff comes up? So this is basically saying, all right, this is all the stuff that you could fit in here, and this is called IntelliSense. And basically IntelliSense is saying, hey, these are all the different things you can be using after input dot. So you could put input dot any key, or acceleration, or get key down, get mouse button down if you guys are trying to make something with a click. All right, and there's a ton of different options here. That goes really far down, all in ABC order, right? The one we're specifically going to be using is get key down, right? Because we want to be able just to press spacebar once and then have it do what we want it to do. So let's do that. So input.get key down. Now, if you guys are curious how I'm auto-filling that, so let's do that again. So input.get, and then you guys can press tab, and it'll autofill get key down. And that's also one of the amazing things about IntelliSense is, let's say you're starting, like, remember when I was typing input and it came up with that little menu, it says, all right, you're typing in an I. It could be all of these. All right, now you put an N. All right, it could be input, but we're not 100% sure. Once you get the P, your first option is going to be input. Watch, so let's do it again. So let's go if INP input, tab, happy as I can be, right? Let's go back. So now we have, so I've covered what IntelliSense is, right? So, but we want to actually finish our code here. So we have if input dot get key down. All right. So now what? We got to put in some parentheses, and we're gonna see what it wants from us, right? So we got to put in some parentheses. Oh, look at that! It says get key down, key code, and a key. Oh, so let's type that in. Key code period. Whoa. Now it's going to go over every single key we have on our keyboard. It even has joysticks. So like if you got a joystick, if you're making a console game, all of your joystick buttons, keypads, mouse, everything. And that is super cool, especially when making a game. But for the purposes of our game, we're making a jumping platformer. We're going to be using spacebar. So let's try typing in space. S-P space. Let's press tab. Number 32, space. But I can't just leave my code like this. As you guys can see, I got a little squiggle line here, and it's yelling at me. It says, invalid expression of term, blah, 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 blah. How do I fix that? For an if statement, it's expecting these curly braces. And this is saying this is a method. This is a method saying, if you do something, but it needs these braces to say, only do what's contained inside of these braces. Alright, if it's on the outside of the braces, you really don't need to be doing something unless I have something in here calling for you. So it's only saying if we press the space bar, do what's in these brackets, do what's in here. Okay, so it makes sense? So now, what do we need to put in order for this code to work? Well, we need to get access to our rigid body. So let's do that. So we're going to do get component. And get component is just as it says, getting a component, right? We add a component over here, right? The script is a component. The rigid body, a component. Capsule collider, a component. You can literally just say get component capsule collider, and it will get this component and you can make changes to it, right? So let's go back to Visual Studios. Let's do simply that. So get component, angle braces, and we're going to type rigid body. Boom. All right, now it's yelling at us. And the only way to fix that is with parentheses because it is a method. Now we're going to put a dot. Alright, now we have access to the rigid body. So what do we want to do to it? Well, there's all kinds of different things you can do, but I personally want to make him jump. So our best option is going to be add force. Well, add force is basically just saying I'm adding a small force to one position. So we're going to add force. Alright. So now, with add force, we have to have a vector 3. What is a vector 3? A vector 3 is the same thing as our position. So let's clear up this little dot, or our transform, as the same thing as our transform, right? A vector 3 is basically the transformation of all three of these positions. So the position, the rotation, and everything in between, right? So it takes in all of this, and it will make changes. So like, let's say I want to make a jump, it'll change it on the X or the Y or whatever the heck it is, right? So that is what a vector 3 is. It is the transformation basically in a vector form. So we're going to type that in. We're going to say vector 3. All right. Now, where do we want to go? Well, we want to go up, right? We're making a jump. So let's make a up. All right. Now what is it expecting us to do? Well, it's still expecting something more. So let's put a comma. And it's asking for a force mode. All right, let's add a force mode. Force mode. Again, I just pressed tab. Now we're going to press dot again. Now these are all the different types of force modes. We have acceleration, force, impulse, and velocity change. Now I don't have it where it says exactly what type of things is, so I'll actually explain them for you. So these two in the middle, force and impulse, depend on its mass. This force acceleration is basically saying, all right, it doesn't depend on its mass, but it's more of an acceleration, not like a push. It's just kind of like a gradual speed up versus a velocity change is like a quick change. It's an instant boom. You're going from one to another immediately. This does not depend on its mass. So like if you're making a gravity dependent games, like if you guys ever played Portal, and how gravity applies to your character as you're going through and you need that gravity to perform some of the specific stunts, then you would be using force or impulse specifically to make those kinds of changes. But we're going to be using velocity change, so let's use velocity change. Alright, now it's pretty happy. I've added the vector 3, the force where I want it to go, and the force mode. I wanted to do a velocity change. Now I want to finish off the line, I add a caret. Alright, cool. Alright, let me fix that. So now this is pretty happy, so let's try it. So I want you guys to press Control S and save your script. Let's head back to Unity and try this out. So we're going to press play, spacebar. That's really not much of a jump, is it? Yeah, it's just kind of like a little leap. Well, we want a pretty big jump, right? We want him to jump pretty high, but it's pretty awesome that we're making him jump. So there's a very simple solution to making him jump. We're going to head back to the vector 3, and we're going to multiply by how much we want him to jump by. I'm going to multiply him by 5. Control S. Let's see how that plays out for us. Let's press play, press space. Ooh, that's a pretty good jump. Oh, and I don't know if you guys noticed this, but watch this. Whee! And coming back down slowly. There he is. So, obviously, anytime I press the space bar, it's going to apply that velocity change, right? It won't be as much as when the first initial jump is. This is just kind of like a Flappy Bird clone, but not really a Flappy Bird clone. This is more of a I'm jumping forever clone, you know? So, obviously, we're going to be fixing that in the future, but for now, we will leave it as it is. However, we need to make some changes, right? I want to be able to make this guy not only be able to jump up, but to move right and left. So, how the heck are we supposed to do that? Well, we're going to add a new method, and it's called a fixed update. What is a fixed update? A fixed update is called once every physics update. So, what is a physics update? Basically, every time you apply physics, that is when it's called. So, usually physics is called like 100 times per frame, right? So it's saying, all right, in this one frame, how many times did you apply physics? All right, you only applied it once. We're only going to apply it once. So this fixed update is applying physics, or it's a fixed update, but it's applying a physics update, okay? And it's different from regular update because update is once per frame versus a fixed update is once per physics update, okay? Does that make sense? So let's fix up our code here, because I really don't like this, right? This is very dependent, and it doesn't really need to be like this, okay? So we're going to set a bool, all right? We're going to make it so that this code we can fix up. So we're going to set a bool. So press enter at the top of your script and type in bool, and we're going to set it as jump height, okay? And the reason it'll go gray is because it's not implemented yet. So obviously it doesn't need to implement it. It's just kind of existing, right? So now we need to set the jump height. So we need to change the component code to check for the bool while keeping our if statement the same. So how do we do that? Well, we're going to copy and paste our if statement. Control C and Control V. All right. Then we're going to change this because we don't want to do it twice, right? So we're going to change this part of the code. We're going to get rid of it, and we're going to see if it's true. So we're going to check if the jump height, and we're going to set it's true. Oh, I can't spell true, right? So this is setting something as true. So there is only true. Jump height is true, okay? So if you're ever setting a variable, make sure you have it set so it's jump height. A bool will always have this. It will always say equals equals, right? Well, what is equals equals? It says it's basically like saying an if it's true, right? So like any if statement, you can add this equals equals true on the end of it, and it'll still work. And basically this is just saying the same thing as if it's true, then do this, right? This is basically a reiterated version of if, but within the if statement. So if it's true, do this. But we don't need the equals true because it's already saying that in the code. It's already saying if it's true, what am I doing? Well, I'm setting jump height to true. Okay, well, what do you mean? What is jump height? How do you set jump height? All right. So we now have set that every time you press space, you set jump height to true. Well, what is jump height? How big is jump height? All right. So we need to go back down here. All right, and we need to set how big our jump height is. Well, we're going to change that right in here. So if our jump height is equals true, remember, we can do without this equals true, but for this example, I will keep it. So if it's true, we want to get the rigid body and we want to add force and go up 5 and do all of our fun stuff. So now this code will work. It's saying every update, it's going to check if we press space once. Only on the key down. All right, we're setting jump height to true. All right, so if it's true, if jump height is true, then we're going to get the component of the rigid body. We're going to add the force and then we're going to make him jump up. All right, let's do it. So I'm going to press space bar. Whoa. He just went off into outer space and he will never come back down. Well, why is that? Why is it that he goes up and never back down? Well, it's because a Boolean is a true or a false, right? And we set it as true, but we never set it back to false, which means it's always going to be true. So it's just going to continuously apply this force forever and ever and ever and ever and never come back down. He's off into the aether permanently. So I'm going to set him back to false. So I'm going to set jump height back to false. So now, every time I press spacebar, it's going to set it to true, and if it's true, add the force, and then set it back to false. So this is how a wonderful little if statement works. So it goes like this. It'll say, all right, I'm going to do this, and once I've done this, I'm going to do this. So if it's true, I'm going to apply the force. All right, after I'm done applying the force, then I'm going to set the jump height to false. So, will this work? Well, let's go try it out. Make sure you guys press Control S. Let's head back into Unity and try it out. So our guy falls, press space, boom, just like that. And we can still jump around infinitely if we want to, but that is okay because we don't really mind that for now. All right, so congratulations. What you have done is officially make your first refactor of code. What is refactoring? It's basically saying, well, I don't like the way this code is currently looking. It works, all right? The code worked just fine when it was just if the input, the key code, and then we add the force, right? We get the component, we add the force. It worked just fine when our code was just like that. So whenever you're making a refactoring of code, you're either shortening it out, right? So we're going to say, all right, I want to shorten it down so it's not as crazy on this one if statement. And it's basically clearing up the code so that it makes the most sense for you. So like if I really wanted to, I could make this component a method and I could say that this is adding force. I could call this method add force. And it's basically just saying anytime you're making code of any sort and you want to make it more reasonable and more understandable for you, you refactor the code so that it makes the most sense for you, but not all the time is it necessary, right? Our code worked just fine when we had just the update method having this dude jump. It worked the exact same as it does now, right? So why would I refactor the code? Well, personally, I don't like it whenever the code is super long, right? So our code was really long when it was just the get component rigid body, right? Yeah, that's super simple, but it doesn't make sense to me, right? Well, I want to declare the variable jump height because let's say I want to make him jump only once. Well, I can't set that in the if statement without causing a lot of problems. So that's why refactoring comes in, right? As long as the code works, you're happy. If you want to make changes in the future, you refactor it, and you can refactor it as many times as you want, right? And throughout your years of coding, you'll get better and better and better, right? But you'll never be able to make perfect code on your first run. And that's just the thing about coding, is accepting the fact that whenever you code something, you're going to make mistakes, right? when I set the jump height to true, but I didn't set it to false, obviously that's a goof on my part, right? That's a bug. I need to fix that. So you go back and you fix it. So you'll never set code perfectly on the initial part, and that's just all part of coding. It's accepting the facts there will be bugs and little glitches that you'll have to fix in the future. And that's honestly the wonderful thing about coding, is that knowing that no matter how hard you try, you'll never have a perfect code on the start, but that's all just part of the fun. So, congratulations, we now have our guy moving up and down. We can make him jump. But now I want to get him to the end of the level. Let's head over here to edit and figure it out. Head down to project settings, and we go to the input manager. What is the input manager? It says what the inputs are to do anything. Well, I want to move him horizontally. There's a convenient one right here. Oh, the name is horizontal with a capital H. This matters. I will show you why later. We have how we move. We have our main buttons, so your left and right on the keyboard, so your little arrows. And then we have our alt buttons, which is A and D. Your main, if you're a PC gamer, obviously you know, right? WASD, that's how you move. So forwards and backwards is going to be your W and S, and then left and right is going to be your A and D. So this is basically just saying what your horizontal axis is, right? Let's actually make it work. All right, so let's close this out and head back into Visual Studio. So how in the heck are we supposed to add a horizontal input into our code? Well, now we need to add what is called a float. This is going to be your second type of variable. What is a float? A float, so let me type it out, a float. Now it's time for me to circle it. Float. What is a float? A float is a number that which can be negative or positive, and it can be a decimal. All right, so 3.14, right? So that is what a float can be, all right? And there's multiple types of ways to input numbers into Unity and C#. Specifically, you can have ints, which are just whole numbers. Floats, obviously, like I said, they're going to be your negatives, positives, and everything in between. Then there's other ones in the future that I will be going over, but most of the time you're going to be using floats and integers, because the more accurate you want to make a game, the more you want to use floats or integers specifically for your game. So we're going to define a float, all right? And this float is going to be how we get our horizontal. So we're going to name it horizontal input caret. If you guys are curious what this little thing, this semicolon is at the end, we call it a caret because that just says this is the end of this line of code. Now, you guys may have noticed how I input my variables. I start off with a lowercase and then subsequently have uppercase every time afterward. Why is that? Honestly, the code works just fine, as you guys saw, with regular. If I had this as a capital J, all of these would still be happy, right? So it really doesn't matter, but for most of your if statements, like if you guys notice down here on the if statement, right? You see that if is all lowercase, input dot get key down. These are, so methods are all capitals, right? And then you have your key code. Both of those words are capital, space is capitalized. And the reason this is within C# is it's a way for it to tell what is a method, what is a variable, what is the difference between what and what. And basically, whenever you're defining a variable, so like these right here, the Boolean or the float, it doesn't necessarily matter, but it's within good practice to have your first letter be a lowercase, and then every subsequent word after that, like let's say I made this word longer than horizontal input, like for example, let's say horizontal input keyboard, right? Then keyboard would be capital key K E Y and then capital B O and then the spell board, right? So obviously, so every subsequent word after your first word will be capital, and this just is within good practice for you to tell. Also, the same thing is to work, so let's say I want to name a variable. You guys can name a variable simply A, and it'll be happy, right? Bool A is true, right? And it does the same thing, right? No matter what, this A will do what you want it to do. You know, you're setting jump height to true What is A? Well, A does this. It makes you jump, right? But me personally, if I just saw this as an A, I would really be confused. If I saw your line of code, right? I'll teach you how to do this in a second, right? I'm going to rename it to A, right? It still does the exact same thing. I saved it. I can head back into Unity and I can still jump, all right? I can still do my jumps, right? So it works just as if I had jump height. But it's a lot more confusing, right? Bool A. Oh, cool. I have an A. A is true. What does that mean? Well, if it's A, then do this, right? So do you see how much more I had to read to figure out what A was versus if, let's rename it again, back to jump height, right? Now all I have to see is this Boolean is called jump height. Oh, look, this sets the jump height. This Boolean is for jump height. This float is for horizontal input. So I only had to read one line versus having to go, okay, where's the first time I see jump height? All right, it's set to true. Well, where else is it set to true? Right down here. So if it's true, what is jump height? All right, it gets the component and it makes it jump. Oh, so A is jump height, right? So I had to read more for the A versus the jump height. So it's also a good practice thing is to name your variables specific things to what they apply to. So if, like, let's say I made another bool, again, we're going to go with the thirsty example, thirsty. All right, now I specifically know that this Boolean is for you being thirsty, right? So that's simply saying it's within good practice to make a float or Boolean or whatever variable you're defining, have it as its name, because if you have it as its name, it's easier to understand within the code what its purpose is. All right. Now, you may have also noticed one more thing is this private in front of this fixed update. What is private? Well, private is saying that this line of code, everything that is contained within these brackets, is only going to apply to this script, to the player CS. All right? So anything that is marked as private will only apply to this. And you guys may be asking, well, what does it mean if it's just void? If it just says a void, you can automatically assume that it's going to be private. This is the same thing as saying private void update. And it works just the same as if it was just void update, right? I don't feel like changing it back. You guys can have it like that if you want. Void works just the same. Now there's only one other way to define a method, and that is called a public. What is a public? A public method is saying I am accessible not only to this script, but to other scripts. So like, let's say you're making like an RPG, right? And you have a bunch of scripts and some of them need to call on one another. So like you have your player script, like you have your little player, and then this calls on the controller script, and this calls on the movement script. Then you would have public methods within all of these scripts so that this one can call to this one could call to this one, and then this one could be like, okay, now I'm happy, let's continue on. If that makes sense. So that is the difference between private and public. Now, let's get back to actually making our character move left and right. So we've made this float horizontal input, and now we're going to implement it into the code. So let's press enter right under the if statement, horizontal input, and we're going to set that equal to the input dot get axis, because we're moving along an axis, and then now we need to give it a name. So we have to give it a string, the axis name, and the axis name is called horizontal. Now we can caret it and save it. Now, strings are letter sensitive, case sensitive. You have to be on the dot. So if you guys don't know for sure how to spell horizontal, you guys can quickly head over here into edit, project settings, and then over here you guys can copy and paste horizontal from the input manager and then paste it in right here, and it'll work just fine. But this doesn't work just yet. We need to head back to our fixed update and add some lines of code. Alright, so we're going to do kind of the same thing. We're going to do a get. That's not how you spell get. Component. That's not what I need. Get. Component. We're going to get the rigid body. We got to make it a method. Alright, now we need to make a velocity because we're changing how fast he moves from side to side. And we need to make another vector 3. So how do we make a new vector 3? we type in new. And we need to make a vector 3, so vector 3. I can't space that, new vector 3. And then we're going to put in the horizontal input because that's the way we're moving. I'm pretty sure you set this equal to, right? You set this as an equal? Yeah, new vector 3. Horizontal input. Now we need to set the y. So we need to put in a float for the y. So let's put in a 0, comma, 0, and caret. And the code is happy. So now the horizontal input says every time you press the A and D key, you're going to access the rigid body and you're going to move. Alright, well let's try it out. So, press play. Whoa! What is happening? So, I don't know if you guys noticed with my code, but this is saying that the horizontal input is going to be affected by this, right? The horizontal input. But the y is now set to 0, right? So even though we've applied this velocity change, right after it does that, it says, oh, I'm now setting this back to 0, so I'm going to fall super slow. So how do I get it so that this doesn't get affected? Well, very simple. We're going to get rid of that by copying getComponent rigidBody.velocity, and we're going to paste it right in here. All right? So basically what this says is getComponent.velocity, right? All right, and then we need to set this to y. So what I basically just said is you get the component of the rigid body and you make a new vector 3, and you make it for the horizontal input so that it moves. Then for the y, you're saying this will not be affected by this line of code. So the y won't be affected, but the z will, or forwards and backwards, right? Because we're making a platformer, we don't want them to fall off the stage. So this is basically all this line of code is saying. It's saying, hey, I want to access the rigid body. I want to change its velocity with a new vector 3, and right, what a vector 3 is the transform, along the horizontal input, which we set as our get axis, right? And that's saying we're moving left and right with the A and D keys, 1 unit every time. And then right after the horizontal input, we get the get component again, and we're saying this, the y, the jump, will not be affected by this get component, and it will only apply this get component, right? And then this won't let us move back and forth. So let's try it out. So we open up play our game, boom, and now I can move. Wait a minute. Whoa, what is happening? I mean, I'm moving. Hold on, wait, let's, Hey, I made it. Wait, Well, that's pretty interesting. I roll. I here, look, I'm scooting around here. Look, I'm a skateboard. But I don't stay up, right? In our platformer game, we want to be basically upright. So we're like wobbling. And the reason is because our force is actually being applied on the bottom of our pill versus the top of it. See how it's just slowly rotating off into oblivion right now? So see how it's just like, no. It's because our force is at the bottom of it versus the top of it. So we're going to get into that very, very soon, all right? But for now, we have a game. We have a game where we can jump around and get to the end of our level. And I didn't make you guys lose your mind without trying to figure out how coding works. So in our next video, we're going to cover how to fix some of the main bugs in our game. Obviously, the number one being I rotate when I don't want to rotate. I can jump infinitely. And also another one you may notice is if you fall. So let's say you fall off the level. Here, let's do it like an easy one, right? Right, I fall off the level. Oh no! Right? You can save yourself. You can also do this. I was just holding the D key, right? I don't want that to happen. So in our next video, we're going to cover how to fix the bugs in your game. Because obviously we don't want our character to just flop over, right? Because now I can't fall. I can't fall down this gap. It's almost impossible for me to fall down this gap while I'm just rolling around like a weirdo, right? So obviously we can change up the level a little bit, right? We can spread it out so we can, all right, this one goes to 4, and then these 2 blocks, we can, let's scooch them, control. Alright, scooch those over here, and then shift click these two. Nope, shift click these two. Control. Move that over there. Right, and then, alright, cool. Now we have a different type of game. Let's move our camera. Right, so let's find our camera and scooch it. Nope, that's the wrong scooch. I need a different scooch it so we have a better look at our level. Right, so we can do all of that still, but it's still that same concept of I'm not gonna be able to really do anything cool when I'm freaking able to jump infinitely, right? It's like normally I wouldn't be able to make this jump with a 5, right? So I wouldn't be able to go and really make it, right? If I was standing upright, I would not be able to make this jump. But I also am able to jump infinitely, so I can be like, all right, I'm gonna make this gap. Now it's time for me to make this gap. Let me just jump. Or let's say I actually fall. Oh no, I'm falling. Let me just stick to the side and then jump. And then make it to the end, right? That's not an actual platformer unless you're intending it to be that way. For our platformer, we want to make it so that it's one jump, boom. All right, can you make it from here to here with that jump? Well, no. So in the next video, that's what we're going to be covering. But for now, I hope you guys have learned your very first beginning steps into coding, and I hope it wasn't too scary. All right, in the next video, we're going to be getting a little bit more intricate with all of the code. But for now, hopefully you guys got a good understanding, and if you have questions, you guys can leave them in the comments down below, and I can answer them for you guys. I will see you guys in the next video. Peace.